and welcome to the 2021 Stanley Cup Final. As we gather today on a virtual basis, hopefully for the last time virtually, I'm in an interview room inside Amalie Arena in Tampa. The good news is thousands of hockey fans are also starting to gather just outside this arena, tailgating, playing ball hockey, and sharing in the joy that only comes from face-to-face interaction, a return to normalcy, particularly in the moments just before a cup final begins. That we are again connecting virtually is a sign that we still have some work to do, and caution remains prudent. But what is going on outside and the atmosphere that our fans will produce when they enter this arena are vivid signs that we are getting there, that the return to normalcy we all crave and work to achieve for the last 15 months is actually drawing closer. For the NHL, normalcy means the greatest athletes in the world playing the greatest game in the world with breathtaking skill and relentless dedication in pursuit of a trophy that is utterly iconic. But it will only be normal when our athletes are playing all of our games and pursuing the Stanley Cup in front of thousands of the most passionate fans in all sports, once again filling all of our arenas. Let there be no doubt, our game and our players need and feed off the energy of our fans. The sights and sounds we've witnessed during these Stanley Cup playoffs have been reassuring and re-energizing. Not just in what we have been seeing in packed houses in places like Vegas, New York, and Tampa, but also in Montreal, where for obvious reasons, only smaller crowds have been permitted to gather. While tonight is a night of celebration, it is also a night of thanks. So, thanks first and foremost to our fans, including those who are watching us live now on Sportsnet in Canada and on the NHL network in the United States. This has been an excruciating 15 months for everyone. And I don't just mean NHL people, players, support staff, but for everybody. We understand that, we recognize that. But for us, the unrelenting fan support throughout the daunting challenges has been unrivaled. And quite simply, we are thrilled to be welcoming our fans back in person. My appreciation also goes out to the NHL's Board of Governors. Under these uniquely challenging circumstances, our ownership refused to waver. Ownership's incredible support has enabled us to operate through the pandemic, and with new investments, our comeback will make us even stronger. To NHL players, we marvel at what you have achieved over the last 2 seasons. I thank all of you, the Players Association, and Don Fehr. We did not get to this point without your incredible cooperation and professionalism. Only because of our players' love of and commitment to the game, their dedication to their craft, their adherence to protocols that have limited their lives both on and off the ice, not to mention they're being tested for COVID almost daily for at least 15 months. Without all of that, we wouldn't have made it this far. At the same time, they've thrilled us and they never cease to amaze us with what they do on the ice. Let me take a moment to send our thoughts and prayers to David Pasternak and Rebecca Rolson on their loss. The NHL family is thinking of you at this time. I would also like to personally thank my colleagues at the league offices, starting with Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly. They have all somehow found ways to work harder and longer over the last year and a half to conduct league business as usual, even better than usual, at a time when it has been anything but. In particular, I would like to note the work of Bill and the team he headed with our Chief Medical Officer, Winna Mawissa, who crafted the protocols that enabled us to finish one season and play another, a combined 1,077 games since the pause, while maintaining our priority on the health and safety of our players, staffs, and our communities. Since the beginning, our return to play last season, the NHL has administered in excess of 350,000 COVID tests to players and staff. Colin Campbell's hockey operations staff, Steve Mayer's event staff, and Steve Hatzapetros' scheduling team remained flexible and agile when we had to realign our divisions, devise a division-only schedule, and then mid-season and on the fly, postpone 55 games because of medical protocol issues, forcing the rescheduling as a ripple effect of a total of 132 games. And I think there were also 5 games that had to be rescheduled because of weather. Kim Davis's social impact group is spearheading an exhaustive effort to mobilize the entire hockey ecosystem and greatly accelerate all of our efforts towards diversity and inclusion. The commitment and involvement of the 4 committees she formed, the executive, player, fan, and youth inclusion councils, have been invaluable. They have brought passion, enthusiasm, and fresh ideas. I thank them for their engagement. Were I to take the time to detail everything these groups and everyone else at the league and our clubs have accomplished since we paused the 2019-20 season last March, we would be here past puck drop. So let me say, get rid of that fly. Let me say, I don't think he's got the right credential. Let me say that the list is overwhelming. And instead, I refer you to a couple of documents that we are posting on NHL.com and our media website. A timeline of our league's activities since March 2020, and a release detailing our efforts and announcing that the NHL will invest an additional $5 million over the next 18 months to expand and even further accelerate our work on diversity and inclusion. One additional note on this topic, the league and our clubs have contributed and or raised millions of dollars for our communities during the pandemic for many causes, including Feeding America and Food Bank of Canada. Just one of the many examples was joining our partner Fanatics in their all-in challenge to raise funds for those impacted by COVID-19. I thank all of our longstanding business partners who are unflinching in their support while we work to complete the 2019-20 season, and then again when we adjusted to ever-changing conditions to begin the 2021 season in January. We are also thrilled to announce, I need a fly swatter, that we're expanding our relationship with Sports Radar with a landmark 10-year global partnership. We look forward to working even more extensively with Sports Radar to give fans, media, and sports betting companies around the world a greater depth of data and more immersive experiences with the game. And I'm delighted to welcome 17 new corporate partners who have joined the NHL family over the last year. Think about the strength of our game and our brand in this environment. We managed to secure 72 new corporate sponsors. And speaking of new partners, we are thrilled to welcome, again, 2 new national media rights holders, our 2 new media national rights holders, the Walt Disney Company and ESPN, and Warner Media and Turner Sports. The media partnerships we concluded recently are groundbreaking and innovative. We could not be more excited at the prospects of how these 2 iconic entities will showcase our game. And we won't have to wait long. ESPN will broadcast both the expansion draft that will begin stocking the Seattle Kraken's inaugural roster on July 21st and the first night of the NHL draft on July 23rd. And speaking of the Kraken, of course, we welcome our newest franchise city, Seattle. By every indication, NHL hockey in Seattle is already a huge success. We also have a goodbye, our sincere thanks to NBC Sports, which has been our U.S. broadcast partner for a decade and a half, and without whose efforts we could not and would not be where we are. Thank you, NBC. Shifting our attention to next season, I am pleased to announce that we are planning to return to a normal calendar and schedule with a robust slate of tentpole events. Our complete 21-22 schedule which will be released between the end of the final and the draft, will feature the Winter Classic on January 1st at Target Field in Minneapolis, with a game between the St. Louis Blues and the Minnesota Wild. We will celebrate Honda NHL All-Star Weekend in Las Vegas. On February 26th, the Nashville Predators will play host to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the 2022 Navy Federal Credit Union Stadium Series game at the Tennessee Titans' home, Nissan Stadium. And while we're not yet finalized, we plan to host a Tim Hortons Heritage Classic in March. Now, with all of these updates, let me take a few moments to address the topic of officiating. It seems every season it's a playoff ritual for me to address some aspect of officiating. Let's be clear. Our officials are not only the best hockey officials in the world, they are the best officials in any sport. Our officials have the hardest game to officiate because no sport comes close to matching the speed and split-second reaction time required to make or not make hundreds of calls in real time. Yes, our officials miss calls. Not as many as some suggest, but they occasionally miss calls, just as coaches and players make mistakes. Officials do on occasion as well. We don't like it when it happens. In fact, we hate it, but it is the nature of the human element of calling our game. And even with the human element, we have been and will continue to be at the forefront of adding technology to assist in their efforts. Our officials are constantly coached and critiqued and held accountable. As an official, you work well, you continue to work. You don't work well, then you don't work. As for the standard that we all expect, our officials are constantly directed. They're implored to maintain it from game one of the regular season through the last game of the final. But as we know, the style of play differs from the regular season to the playoffs, and that has an obvious impact on how officiating is perceived. Finally, overwhelmingly, our officials get it right. We always know that there are a handful of calls and non-calls that we wish would be otherwise. And depending on your rooting interest, you will likely have even more than a handful. Would we prefer that perfection is achieved? Of course, absolutely. Is it possible? Of course not. But it is our goal to continue the effort to get as close to perfection as possible. And we will continue to recruit, train, educate, evaluate, and make this part of the game the best that it can be. We are at the culmination of our 2021 season, and I want to congratulate our two finalists. The Montreal Canadiens, owner Jeff Molson, general manager Marc Bergevin, head coach Dominique Ducharme, interim head coach Luke Richardson, captain Shea Weber, and all of the players. And the Tampa Bay Lightning, owner Jeff Vinik, general manager Julien Brisebois, head coach John Cooper, and all of the players led by captain Steven Stamkos. To both organizations, well done and good luck. They have made it through 3 of the 4 rounds required to host and hoist the most coveted trophy in all of sports. The 4th round begins tonight. Like all of you and our fans, we are excited for this Stanley Cup final to begin. And with that, Bill Daly and I will be happy to take your questions.
Okay, our first question comes from Stephen Wino of the Associated Press. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, gentlemen. Gary, the Chicago Blackhawks launched an investigation today into allegations into Bradley Aldrich. I'm curious, when did the league learn of these allegations, and when did the league at some point figure out that the Blackhawks perhaps did not handle this correctly?
Well, first of all, we learned relatively recently, considering that the allegations, I think, at least from what we know publicly, are 10 years old or thereabouts, and we believed that it was appropriate in the first instance for there to be an independent investigation, which has been commissioned previously by the Blackhawks and is underway. This is obviously a matter of litigation. We'll await the findings from the independent investigation, which is being conducted by Jenner and Block. which has no connection to either the Blackhawks or the league, and it's being spearheaded by a former federal prosecutor. So we'll await the results of the investigation and then decide what, if anything, needs to be done from our standpoint.
Thank you, Stephen. Next question comes from Scott Burnside of The Athletic. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. Sorry, Gary, you alluded to the schedule coming out in short order. Can you tell us whether there is an Olympic break as part of that schedule, or where are we at with that and what that might look like?
We don't know as of right now, and that's causing us, in addition to consternation, a fair number of issues relative to getting next season up and running. It's reaching the point that we're getting concerned about the impact on that season because of the uncertainty. And this may be a good time anticipating future questions. Bill, why don't you give an update as to where the Olympic issue stands?
So, I mean, it's still very much a work in progress. All parties are engaged. You know what the league's traditional and historical position has been on the Olympics. We remain of that view. And in fact, with the future games in Beijing and the continued uncertainty with the virus and the games being halfway around the world, not necessarily an ideal games to elect to go to. Having said that, we negotiated in good faith with the Players Association last summer. We agreed that if the conditions were right and we could reach agreement on all the material issues, that we would commit and support going to the Olympics, and that remains our position. We've deferred to the Players Association to try to work through those issues, and that continues, as I said, to be a work in progress. But as Gary alluded to, time is running very short, so hopefully we'll have some resolution soon.
We have real concerns about whether or not it's sensible to be participating, having our players participate, and us shutting down for the Olympic break. But as Bill said, we made a promise that if it can all be worked out, then we'll go along with it. But we are concerned both about the timing right now and about the open issues and the prospects of actually being there.
Thank you, Scott. Next question comes from Chris Johnston of Sportsnet. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, gentlemen. Question for Gary. I'm just wondering, can you clarify with the Blackhawks situation? Did you guys coordinate with the team, that is the league, on their investigation, or how did that play out as opposed to maybe doing one independently on your own?
Well, it's being done independently by a law firm that's been retained. We're satisfied that the retention has been appropriate. And in the first instance, we're going to wait and see what the results are from this investigation, and then we'll determine what, if anything, we need to do to follow up.
Thanks, Chris. Next question comes from Katie Strang of The Athletic. Go ahead, Katie.
Gary, you said that you became aware of the allegations against Brett Aldrich relatively recently. When did you specifically become aware of those allegations, and how were you made aware of those allegations?
I think you should answer that question.
Yeah, I couldn't give you a specific time period, Katie. As Gary said, it was relatively recently. We were made aware of those allegations by counsel for the Chicago Blackhawks.
Thanks, Katie. Next question comes from Emily Kaplan of ESPN. Go ahead, Emily.
Hi, Gary and Bill. I was curious, would the NHL consider punishment to the individuals or the clubs with the Chicago Blackhawks, depending on what the review shows?
All options are available if there's something that warrants punishment, and I think we need to wait and see what the result of the investigation and the litigation that seems to be pending as well. These are allegations. What we know is based on what's public. And that's why we're going to be interested to see what the investigation reveals and doesn't reveal. And so I think everybody needs to not get ahead of themselves. These are allegations that relate to a period of time that's quite some time ago, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time to piece things together. When we get all the information, we will do what is necessary and appropriate at the
Thank you, Emily. Next question comes from Mark Lazarus of The Athletic. Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, Gary. Do you anticipate the findings of that investigation being made public, or is that going to stay in-house?
Let us see what the investigation reveals, and then we can figure out what comes next. I think everybody's jumping too far, too fast. This is going to be handled appropriately and professionally and done right.
Thanks, Mark. Next question comes from John Warrow of the Associated Press. Go ahead, John.
Hi, Gary. This is for you, and it's about women's hockey. After initially saying the NHL would only step in to back up pro women's hockey league if the two existing entities stepped aside, has the NHL backed off on that position and now asking the PWHPA and NWHL to see if they can strike a partnership, and why might that be the case?
I think that in order to best develop a professional league that may perhaps be stronger than the one that exists, it would be better if everybody could get on the same page. The sports marketplace, perhaps other than the big four, of which we're one, is pretty fragmented. And if you're going to make a go of a new league, you got to have all your ducks in a row. And our hope is that the women's professional landscape can be more unified going forward, so it can be a more effective participant in that sports landscape. We've been keeping an eye on things, and we're hopeful that the various groups can get together, but we've actually been a little distracted for the last 15 months trying to make sure that we could do what we had to do under difficult circumstances with our league. But we are extraordinarily supportive of women's hockey going forward, and at the right time and under the right circumstances, we see a role for us to the extent we're invited.
Thanks, John. Next question comes from Josh Clipperton of the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, gentlemen. Gary, just going back to the Blackhawks situation, what was your reaction to the allegations?
The reaction, whenever you hear allegations like that, are concerning. But my first reaction is, tell me the facts. And once we know what the facts are, we're in a better position to evaluate what may or may not need to be done.
Thanks, Josh. Next question comes from Kevin McGran of the Toronto Star. Go ahead, Kevin.
Gentlemen, Gary, you referenced in your opening remarks that the regular season and the playoffs regarding the officiating in the game itself, it almost seems to be two different sports. Are you happy with that? I mean, you have some of the greatest players of the regular season don't make it past the second round. Some say because of the officiating that grinds them down. Wouldn't you rather the game be similar in the playoffs to the one the fans witness in the regular season?
The teams will decide how they want to play a series. And unlike the regular season, when you're playing series, multiple games, there are adjustments that go on. I think we saw more of that this year when teams were playing divisional play and multiple games against the same team in a row. We believe that the officiating standard is and should be called consistently. Overwhelmingly it is, but the stakes get higher and our players ramp it up. I think that's the nature, the competitiveness of our game. By the way, I think our competitive balance, both in the regular season and the playoffs, is extraordinary. I think it's the best in all of sports, and our fans overwhelmingly tell us that they like the product.
Thanks, Kevin. Next question comes from Frank Saravalli of dailyfaceoff.com. Go ahead, Frank.
Hi, Bill. This question is for you. Without going into specific medical details, given the spirit of the CBA, can you explain why the league is comfortable with Tampa Bay icing a lineup in the playoffs that wouldn't be close to cap compliant in the regular season? And could you envision a scenario in which the cap is also included in part of the playoffs?
I'll answer the last question first. I mean, certainly I could. That'll be a product of collective bargaining at an appropriate time. If we as a league or the clubs generally feel like change needs to be made. The system was designed the way it's designed. It's worked very, very well for the time we've had it in place. Nothing inappropriate was done here. And at the end of the day, all the managers know what the rules are. The facts seem to align with the situation that allowed Tampa to bring back a significant player in the playoffs. I'm not apologizing for what is a sound system and has been a sound system from the start.
How long has this provision been in effect?
Since 2005.
This is not new news for anybody, and circumstances were what they were, and we were satisfied that there was nothing untoward going on.
Thank you, Frank. Next question comes from Andrew Ardini of NHL.com International. Go ahead, Andrew.
Good evening. Just wondering if you have an update on the timeline of the Olympics, if that needs to be settled by the time that schedule is released in a few weeks, and if there's any other updates on any other international events. Thanks.
I think the timeline is kind of what we suggested in the sense that we do have a schedule that needs to be released in a couple of weeks. I think the commissioner alluded to the fact that we typically release our schedule between the end of the Stanley Cup Finals and the draft. Obviously, the draft this year is July 23rd. So I would hope that we will continue to work through the issues and know where we are well in advance of that.
We were already past the time that we hoped that this would be resolved. And that's why I said before, the uncertainty that this is causing on the scheduling and everything we have to do for next season has become concerning. We'll deal with it, just as we've managed to be agile and flexible over the last 15 months. But we're getting to be on a rather short time frame now because this can't go on indefinitely.
Thanks, Andrew. Next question comes from Jean-Francois Chamant of Journal de Montreal. Go ahead, JF.
Good evening. A question for Mr. Bettman. I'm just curious to know, Gary, on a personal note, the first time that you've been giving the Stanley Cup, it was to the Montreal Canadiens in 1993. What kind of memory is bringing you back, even though it's not over for the Canadiens?
Giving out the Stanley Cup is always a special experience for me. It's an honor. It's the best thing I get to do. And while it's been a few years, I remember that night in 1993 like it was yesterday. It was exciting, it was compelling, and for me it was the first time. And it was, I would dare say, overwhelming.
Thanks, JF. Next question comes from Neil McHale of InsideHockey.com. Go ahead, Neil.
Hello, gentlemen. I have a question for each of you. Straightforward from you, Gary. Is there any chance with the issues with the cap not raising that you might offer clubs some kind of a buyout, maybe a compliance buyout like we've seen in the past?
No, I don't envision that at all. The goal for what we had to get through for the last 15 months, concluding 1920 and playing this season, has been to conserve as much money as possible. Because revenues have obviously been dramatically impacted by, among other things, obviously not having fans and buildings for the most part. We believe that what we have in place is designed to right-size our economics and recapture the overpayments that we made. So what we have in place and agreed to with the Players Association, I don't envision changing.
Thanks, Neil.
There was a second question for Bill.
Sorry.
Didn't ask it.
Sorry, Neil.
You can have the next question.
Next question comes from Eric Fisher of the Sports Business Journal. Go ahead, Eric.
Ask Bill, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Question for Gary. You referenced in your opening remarks some of the sponsor involvement during this 15-month period, and you obviously brought in a lot of new inventory with the helmet sponsors and the divisional sponsors. Are those all continuing, or what is the plan going into next season?
We're planning to continue the logos on the helmets, and I know there's a lot of speculation about advertising on uniforms. That's nothing that will be in place for next season. But we think the things that we did, whether it was the slot virtual or the identification on helmets, made a little bit of an impact on what was happening to revenues for the past year. And we didn't get much pushback. I think it didn't turn out to be a distraction. All the fan feedback and research we've gotten and done said that this isn't a problem for us, so we're comfortable with the steps that we took during the season. Obviously, the tarps are not going to be maintained for next season because we expect to have fans in those seats. But the slot virtual and the helmet stickers, we think make sense going forward.
Thanks, Eric. Next question comes from John Mattis of The Score. Go ahead, John.
Hi, Gary and Bill. With the NHL embracing the world of legal sports betting, I'm wondering, could we be seeing more transparency with lineup decisions next season, specifically teams having to announce their starting goalie and perhaps getting rid of the upper body, lower body injury labels?
To this point in time, that's not being contemplated. And again, I've done many interviews on this. People ask whether our sports betting partners have requested it, have expressed any concerns with regard to our current policies. None of that has been done. And at the end of the day, we have to have policies that facilitate the game on the ice, because the game on the ice is what's most important. And we'll continue in that vein.
Thank you, John. Next question comes from Ken Campbell. Go ahead, Kenny.
Gary, you touched on officiating, and you did say that the calls are missed, and I think everybody can sympathize with that and understand that. I think where people have a problem is the calls that are seen and not called. And
it's easy when you're watching it on television and replay, or you're watching it from 100 or so feet off the ice and get a broader view. You have to look at it from the perspective of the officials on the ice and what they get to see in real time. And I wouldn't minimize the difficulty of that task.
Well, I agree. I agree it's difficult, but you just said that they're the best officials in any sport. So they should have this, I would think. We all see it. You see it. And if these are the best officials in the world, how do you explain when an official's looking right at a play and doesn't make the call? And I'm wondering too, are you putting the style of play and the difference in the game on the players and the teams at this point?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I said the perception of what goes on from an officiating standpoint is influenced by the style of play and the perception of it, not the reality of it. The game gets played, and I don't think it would be fair to suggest that any of these games are being decided by the officials. They're being decided by the players on the ice, as it should be. And it's very easy to focus on the 2 or 3 calls you think they missed. And it's easier for you to see it based on the vantage point you have. Try going on the ice and being in the midst of everything that's going on and making split-second calls. It's extraordinarily difficult. Now, we've done a variety of things. We've added a second referee. We've increased video replay. We've changed standards on things like slashing, and we're looking at cross-checking. This is constantly evolving. And as the game has gotten even faster than it's been, it's the fastest it's ever been, the officiating gets harder, and we're focused on how to keep up with it. And that's something that is never static. It's something that is an ongoing process that Coley Campbell and Stephen Walkham and their respective groups are working on constantly to make sure we're doing the best job we can. But for you to suggest that missing an occasional call when you think the official sees it, you don't know what the official's seeing because you're not in the same position that he is.
Thanks, Ken. Next question comes from Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic. Go ahead, Pierre.
I have 2 questions, if I may, probably for Bill, but if Gary wants to jump in as well. The first is I want to ask about the hotline that the league established about a year and a half ago in lieu of Akeem Aliyu and all the fallout from that situation. How impactful has that hotline been? I mean, I know you're not going to share what's happening on that hotline for obvious reasons, but are teams using that hotline to report concerns? And the second question, what is the holdup right now on getting an Olympic deal done?
So on the first issue, it's up and running. It has been, I think, now for several months. Part of the dynamic of introducing a hotline like this is making potential people who want to engage with it, comfortable in engaging with it. So that is, by definition, a process of time. I do think it's been well received. We've delivered education to all the relevant constituencies associated with the availability of the hotline. So I do think it'll serve a vital role going forward. But if you're asking kind of specific impact, and in particular, our discussion earlier on the Chicago situation, one had nothing to do with the other. With respect to the Olympics, there are a couple remaining open issues. A lot has to do with the uncertainty of the games, the continued uncertainty of the games with respect to what the rules will be associated with the games, whether there'll be spectators, whether there won't be spectators. How the Tokyo games this summer may impact how the Beijing games are run. There are COVID-related insurance issues that are very important to all the relevant parties. The players and the clubs and the league alike, and the Players Association,
Families.
and the families. So there remain open issues. I do think we have worked through a lot of the more basic issues. But again, we continue to be on uncharted territory to a certain extent with respect to the COVID situation and what that means and what it'll be like come February in Beijing. So there's a lot of uncertainty and unknowns that we're trying to grapple with, and that takes time.
Thank you, Pierre. Let's go to Mary Fiello of the Tampa Bay Times. Go ahead, Mary.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I was hoping that you could go through some of the protocols and provisions that you all have in place for the teams when they go to Montreal for at least games 3 and 4.
So, as part of allowing us to conduct a series on both sides of the border, with a team from the United States traveling into Canada to play games, and with the team from Canada traveling into the United States to play games and then returning to Canada, we have negotiated, for lack of a better term, a comprehensive health and safety protocol that's very similar to the protocols that we started this season with in all of our markets. But obviously in markets like Tampa and Florida and Las Vegas and Texas, there's been relaxation of those protocols over time. And so, while it's familiar on some level, it is distantly familiar to Tampa. But the primary differences in the protocols is a stricter approach to home work quarantine, so that the players typically are in their hotels or homes and in the arena, and don't do a lot of socializing in between, don't do any socializing. And the mask use, and those protocols to be effective for both teams and to keep the entire community healthy and safe. Those protocols are applicable both during games in Tampa Bay, but also during games in Montreal. And so the clubs were reminded of that this weekend. We went through the protocols in a call we had with Tampa and Montreal on the same call. Everybody's accepted those stricter protocols for purposes of playing this series, in pursuit of the Stanley Cup, which is the most important for both those teams right now.
And we respect the protocols as instituted and required by the government and the health authorities in Canada. We've got an extraordinary cooperation, but by the same token, we have been required to insist on strict compliance with those protocols. And while we are grateful that we've been able to get the exception we have to move people essential to the game on both sides of the border, it wasn't without us making sure we were doing the right things from a medical COVID standpoint.
Thank you, Mary. We have time for a few more. Let's go to Nick Kotsanika from NHL.com. Go ahead, Nick.
This question is for Carolina fans. I know the Hurricanes were scheduled to have a Stadium Series game. It was canceled due to the pandemic. Are there any plans or consideration for another one?
Yes, we'll be back at some point. It's just a question of timing, stadium logistics and the like. But we were very much looking forward to having an outdoor game in Carolina, and we will schedule another one at some point.
Thanks, Nick. Next question comes from Brian Hedger. Go ahead, Brian.
Hey guys, this is for either one of you. One of the more popular events on the NHL calendar was the European-based games, obviously, and Columbus was a part of that. Those got canceled. What's the update, on that going forward? Where does the league stand on that situation?
Well, that in some respects is being held hostage by the Olympic decision as well. So we definitely want to continue those games. We want to continue those games at the earliest possible time. Part of our decision-making process with respect to whether we could or can conduct those games in the coming year has to do with almost entirely to do with the Olympics. So we'll see how we get through the Olympic situation, and then we'll make appropriate decisions at appropriate time.
Thanks, Brian. Next question comes from Mark Burns of the SBJ. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, this is a quick follow-up to Eric Fisher's question on helmet ads. This is related to jersey ads. I guess the two-part question: Are jersey patches basically inevitable for the league, and how soon could you envision that coming to fruition? Thanks.
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's inevitable. It's something that it makes good sense for us to be considering and looking at. But as I said, certainly not for the next season. What happens beyond then, I'm not prepared to predict, but it is something we're looking at.
We'll take two more. Start with Eric Engels from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Eric.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for doing this. I'm just wondering, how do you balance the integrity of your playoff format with the need to generate more revenue moving forward? You've got 32 teams coming into the league, or a 32nd team coming into the league. I wonder what the push is from owners around the league to potentially boost the amount of teams going in to keep playoff races alive in more markets and generate more revenue that way and playoff gate revenue.
It's not a front burner issue or consideration. You can find a general manager or an owner who might suggest it's something that he's thinking about or might think is a good idea. But at the end of the day, we think our competitive balance is extraordinary. Our regular season races typically, when we're not in strict divisional play, go down to the wire. And we think what we've had for the last few years, putting aside this past season, has been terrific. We don't see a need to change it, and having a 50-50 balance with a 32nd team, half the teams making it, half not, is the right balance. So we're not looking to make a change.
And if you ask that general manager or coach at a different point in time, he may have a different answer.
Thanks, Eric. And our last question will come from Barry Bloom of Sportico. Go ahead, Barry.
Thank you. Hi, gentlemen. I've got a question here for both of you. Harkening back to the start of the season, since the playoffs are going so late, are we talking about an October 1st start or mid-October start? How do you envision this all working into the schedule at this point? And then secondly, for you, Bill, probably, do the back-to-back home games. What did you think about that in this format? And is that something that you'd like to keep in the mix at some point in the future? Gary, then I have a quick one for you.
Well, okay, I'll take the first part of the question.
Yeah.
We'll be starting in the first half of October. It won't be on the first. It'll probably be in the double digits, but in the first half.
Okay.
I think the second question, Barry, had to do with scheduling the same team against the same opponent
in back-to-back games.
in consecutive dates. That is something that some of our teams have embraced, and it certainly makes sense in some of the travel situations we see. So I do believe we'll incorporate it on an increased basis going forward.
Okay.
Although, keep in mind that you have to look at the number of times teams play each other when we go back to the old format. When teams were in strictly divisional play and playing 8 games, 4 at home, 4 on the road, it was a little easier to schedule like that. If you only see a team twice in your own building, query whether or not you want to see a particular team 2 times at your own building in October and then not see them at home for the rest of the regular season. So there's a countervailing balance to whether or not it makes sense on a widespread basis.
By definition, less opportunities to do it.
Right,
Understood.
Gary, pre-COVID, the Coyotes were going from the Pacific to the Central. Is that still the case? And
yes,
what do you anticipate that kind of impact having on that franchise?
I think it'll be fine. When we, as a league, made the decision as part of the Seattle expansion, it made perfect sense. When you account for time zones and where snowbirds come from, we think this will work out very well for Arizona. I understand that we're done taking questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We're excited, as I said in my opening remarks, about getting to this point in the season. I think we can all agree it has been an unusual season and it wasn't easy to get here, but we're thrilled to be here and we're excited to start the Stanley Cup Final. Enjoy the games, and again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.